1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Alright guys, welcome back to another video. If you're new here and roller coasters are what you're into, then please consider subscribing for content all about roller coasters. So today I wanted to talk about how I became an enthusiast, or how I became what I am today. And this is probably a very interesting story. It might not be what you would expect from a video like this. So without further ado, let's get right into this. So my first taste into amusement rides, I'd say, is when I was 4 years old and I went to my local county fair for the first time. I had what I thought was an amazing time, and my family made it a tradition to go to the fair once a year, as it only comes on one weekend. For a long time, every time I went to the fair, I only rode kiddie rides. I didn't even ride their wave swinger. You know that fun family ride that swings and spins you above ground and tilts you at the same time? Yeah, I was too scared to even ride that. And even their kiddie drop tower, I was still too scared to ride it. And at that time, they had one roller coaster. It was a sketchy kiddie coaster that all it did was hills with no airtime, and that's what you expect with kiddie coasters, right? Well, one year I wanted to ride the roller coaster. And you know how fairs changed their ride lineup some years, right? Well, that year, they replaced that sketchy kiddie coaster with a more extreme kiddie coaster. The ride is called Dragor, and it still comes to my local fair. And when I got on it for the first time, I hated it when I came off of it. What I was scared about was not the drop or G-forces or airtime. It was the bank turns apparently, and it wasn't even banked that much. But I was scared that I was going to tilt off the track. Weird, right? And since my first roller coaster ride, I never rode a roller coaster again for a very long time, until one year. And that was the year 2014. I was in 5th grade. That was how long it took. And that year, I decided to ride a bunch of rides I was scared of for a very long time. And that wasn't because of Coaster Kids. That channel wasn't even created yet. I decided to ride their wave swinger, their kiddie drop tower. There was a new kiddie coaster that was actually a spinning coaster, and Dragor at the time was replaced by that sketchy kiddie coaster I talked about earlier. So that was my first roller coaster ride since that horrible Dragor experience. Wave swingers became my favorite flat ride at the time. Their kiddie drop tower was very fun. That's how I loved drop towers. And I had fun on that roller coaster. And Jungle Twist, which was the new spinning coaster, became what I guess was my favorite coaster at the time. And after that visit, I wanted to learn more about what other cool flats there were. So interesting enough, I didn't get into coasters first, but rather flat rides. I learned about what other carnival flats are called rather than their model name, and I was obsessed with flat rides for a pretty long time. But then that died down and I got interested in other things. The next year, I decided to ride their Scrambler, which was called Super Sizzler, their Gravitron ride, Area 51, and Pharaoh's Fury, their sort of pirate ship ride, for the first time. I didn't really like all three because Sizzler had too strong laterals in my opinion. Area 51 made me nauseous, and I was scared of flying out on Pharaoh's Fury. But in 2016 was a quote-unquote big year for me in terms of theme parks. We planned on going to both Disneyland and Disney California Adventure. I've heard from my parents' friends that when they went there, they didn't like Magic Mountain because of how long the lines are, but they loved Knott's Berry Farm. So as GP as I was, I first thought Knott's Berry Farm was a farm. But then I did a little research into it and found that they got Accelerator, they got Silver Bullet, they got Ghost Rider, which I later found just got retracked. And I found they have a Camp Snoopy area so my little 5-year-old brother at the time could enjoy himself there. So I told my mom, let's go to Knott's along with Disneyland. And I was so excited to go to both parks until the day before we went on our trip, my mom changed plans and she wanted to go to Universal Studios Hollywood instead of Knott's Berry Farm. So you could tell I was very angry. So we went to Universal and Disneyland, and I loved Disneyland, but didn't really like Universal as I would expect. And I didn't ride Revenge of the Mummy because I was afraid it would have a loop in it and mummies would scare me. But while we're on the topic of Disneyland, however, I found two big milestones. When I went to Disneyland Park, I got on my first non-kiddie coaster ever, which was Space Mountain. Since I was a Star Wars fan at the time, I loved Space Mountain because of how intense it was and the Star Wars theme. Then I also got on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, which I loved too, but I thought the third drop sucks. But it's a family coaster after all. Then day 2 comes when I go to California Adventure. Originally when I went to Disneyland, I wasn't planning on riding their biggest roller coaster. I never thought I'd ride my first extreme roller coaster until day 2. And that roller coaster was California Screamin'. That coaster would become my first thrill coaster and my first ride ever to go upside down. But my younger group of friends that went with me wanted to ride it, and even when I didn't want to, I decided to ride it. Most likely it was because I didn't want to be embarrassed that my younger brother can ride bigger rides than me. And as you can tell, my Jeepy self was happy there was over-the-shoulder restraints. But California Screaming was a blast for me. I loved it. I made a mini celebration that I won on my first loop, and even better, the on-ride soundtrack. But at the time, I actually preferred Space Mountain to California Screamin'. Weird, right? But as I started not being a Star Wars fan anymore, my appreciation for Space Mountain changed, and now I prefer California Screamin'. And after that visit, I loved theme parks so much, I started getting into them. I wanted to know more about roller coasters. In 2016, I only got a little taste for the coaster community, not much. I found channels like Coaster Studios and Coaster Kids. I learned about a new group of people called Coaster Enthusiasts, and I learned about what coasters are ranked in top 10 best coasters in the world and top 10 worst coasters in the world lists. And at the time, I thought Millennium Force was the best coaster in the world. And I was hyped up because of the Six Flags announcement videos that I was obsessed about. And all the parks I knew were Six Flags Parks, Disney Parks, Universal Parks, Knott's Berry Farm, Cedar Point, and Busch Gardens Tampa. But then my local fair came around again, and since I rode California Screamin', I decided to conquer my fear and ride the next big ride at the fair. And that was Zipper. Guys, Zippers are awesome, very underrated. They're so intense and amazing. There was only one ride left that I didn't ride, and that was actually replaced for the next year, so I never got to ride it. That was called Fireball. It was a Larson Superloop. I will make it a priority to ride a Superloop if a park has one. But then 2017 came around. The reason why I went to California in 2016 was because my brother won a soccer tournament and played another tournament in California. But in 2017, that tournament was held again. It was called President's Day Cup, or PDC as my brother likes to call it. Their coach said if they won the tournament, they would play another tournament in California. And when I heard about that, I thought that maybe this will be my chance to finally go to Knott's Berry Farm, the park that I was originally going to go to. So I asked my mom, if they win, can we go to Knott's Berry Farm? And she said yes. And guess what? My brother's team won the whole tournament. So I finally got to go to Knott's Berry Farm. There were a lot of milestones that I got at Knott's. I rode my first wooden coaster, Ghost Rider. I rode my first invert, Silver Bullet, which also had my first corkscrew, wow, Zero G Roll, and Cobra Roll. I thought the Zero G Roll was a weird feeling, but I liked it. And also I rode my first coaster over 200 feet, which was Accelerator. And that became what, as of when this video was made, my number one coaster. Also rode my first backwards coaster, Montezuma's Revenge. I also rode my first pendulum ride, La Revolucion, and my first extreme drop tower, Supreme Scream. That was my biggest fear from the Knott Strip, and I loved it. And I still love drop towers. If a park has one, I'll be sure to ride it when I come. But then after that Knott Strip, I loved roller coasters so much again. I researched so much on what's the best roller coasters in the world. Rumors! At the time, RMC Mean Streak was still just a rumor. And I found more amazing channels like Coaster Studios and Coaster Kids again. I also found Coaster Force, Theme Park Review, Canada Coaster Fan, Coaster Bot, and much more. And later on, I found smaller coaster channels that are still really good. Like at the time, Coaster Frenzy was still under 100 subs, Coaster Watch, and others. And when that trip was over, I started to make my own videos and edit them. I made reviews of the 3 major Knott's coasters I've ridden. And I filmed my Maui Fair vlog back in 2017, which I still think is the cringiest video on my channel. But when I made those videos, I never planned on putting it on YouTube. And also, I witnessed my first new roller coaster announcements. National Roller Coaster Day 2017 was me going crazy over 5 coasters announced that day. I went crazy especially over Steel Vengeance, but then I continued to research and learn more about coasters and the coaster community. I learned all of the Cedar Fair parks and places like Hershey Park and Dollywood. I also learned what GP means too. And I also got Planet Coaster all the way back from summer of 2017. Now I have over 1,000 hours under my belt playing that game, and let me tell you, Planet Coaster is worth the $50+. This continued all the way until January 2nd, 2018, and my brother, out of nowhere, noticed me making videos, and he said, let's make you a YouTube channel. We thought hard about all the stuff, and then on the same day, 808 Coaster Life was born. And that, my friends, is my story on how I became an enthusiast. and the story continues through this channel. I'd say I've improved a lot from the earlier days in terms of making videos and optimizing my channel. But what you should know is that anyone can become an enthusiast. They just have to have a passion for roller coasters and theme parks. And if you love roller coasters, you've come to the right place. So please consider subscribing for content all about roller coasters. And if you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like. I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.